Hi and welcome to this session about useful basic 101 IT service management terminology. So I will go through a number of terms that I'm aware I've kind of been using over the last 25 years or so in service management, and I thought it would be useful just to go through a few of those items. Okay, so first of all, we've got the term ITSM. So this stands for IT service management, and that is an approach that is performed by IT service providers. So, for example, people, the processes, and IT. It's a set of practices, a set of processes that make up a service management system, and the emphasis in ITSM is very much around creating value, co-creating value, quality, continuous service improvements, all for the stakeholders. Think of that the concept is to enable companies to maximise value, business value from their IT investment, and it's a means of getting that value obtained over the whole life cycle, the whole all of the various dimensions, to use some ITIL terminology there, of the service. Think end to end. So that's ITSM. The next phrase that you hear in IT service management circles is CAB, C-A-B, and that stands for Change Advisory Board, and that's part of the change management process, the change management practice that is used. It's typically a governance board for approving changes. So I quite like to think of a CAB as a way of protecting the production environment, making sure that any changes have been reviewed from a risk perspective, and from a compliance perspective, and from a technical perspective, just to make sure that there's no risk to those. Perhaps it's a release or an update to a piece of software. So it's very much about protecting the production environment and approving those and asking the right questions. Typically these boards meet on a regular basis, so perhaps that's every Wednesday at 3 o'clock. There will be a weekly meeting to collect all of the members of the Change Advisory Board together, and those changes will have been put together and discussed, and somebody will present those changes, and everyone has the opportunity to ask questions around it. It also raises the awareness of those changes. Usually there's a couple of types of CABs. That you can have a technical CAB, and then you can have a customer CAB. So for example, perhaps if your IT services are outsourced to a third-party provider, perhaps there's an internal technical CAB by the outsource provider, and then following that there will be a customer CAB where those changes are then presented to the customer. In the change management, the change enablement process and practice, there's usually a couple of roles there: change manager and the CAB chair, so the person who chairs that meeting. And the audience typically is a mixture of people from IT and from within the business. And the changes are presented, as I mentioned earlier, and it gives people the opportunity to ask those questions and to understand more about those changes. So the next term that you may hear is SIAM, and that stands for Service Integration and Management. And this is about helping customers, helping perhaps your client manage the issue of having many relationships with lots of different service providers. So it's an operating model that allows there to be a service integrator that manages the relationship upwards with the customer, but also downwards, if you like, looking at this graphic, with the various service providers, so that there could be lots of different service providers, but the customer effectively just all they're interested in is that their IT services are running effectively, reliably, securely, they're available, so on and so forth, and their relationship is with that service integrator. So it's about integrating them into a single facing business organisation. So as you can see, I've put a very quick graphic there around that there's three levels. You have the customer organisation, the service integrator, and then all of the various service providers. And typically it's seen as a way for large organisations to better manage and control multi-sourced operations. It's an effective way of running an operating model. Typically it's larger organisations, larger corporations, perhaps with a global footprint, or sort of lots of service provider relationships that it's becoming difficult for the customer to manage all of those service provider relationships, but also trying to put together some kind of end-to-end responsibility and accountability. If you've got lots of different service providers all doing their bit, quite often you may have come across a situation where one service provider will say it's the other service provider that's at fault, and then you have the poor customer kind of thinking, well, actually I don't really care whose fault it is, it just needs fixing, regardless of where the issue is, whether it's hardware, software, networking, whatever the problem is. And that's where a service integrator will be able to come in and will align all of those contracts, the service providers, to an end-to-end model. Okay, so that's what SIAM is. SIAM is Service Integration and Management. Okay, another term you will hear in service management circles, in IT service management circles, is ITIL. And ITIL stands for Information Technology Infrastructure Library, and ITIL provides information and guides on how ITSM can be delivered. It's worth mentioning there are other frameworks, so ITIL is a framework, that there are other frameworks, but ITIL is certainly very widely used and very widely accepted, and is a very strong, prominent framework that is widely used. But in the context of ITSM, ITIL is a very is kind of up there in terms of a main player. So it sets guidelines to deliver good quality IT services. It's a best practice framework to deliver value. There's two key words there I just want to emphasise: best practice and delivering value, co-creation of value. Those are key elements within ITIL, and it utilises IT as a tool for change, for transformation, looking at efficiencies, optimizations, how can it be improved, looking at mapping those processes that are delivering services Are they in good shape? Is there some waste in there perhaps? And it gives IT direction to a business and associated resources and assets. The last point there, there's a heavy focus on co-creation of value through service relationships. So that's ITIL, which is certainly a term you will come across in IT service management circles. So the next slide is incident. So an incident is an unplanned interruption to a service or a quality, level of quality in a service. Now, from an ITIL perspective, you can see on the screen there, there's ITIL 3's version of what is an incident, which is it's an unplanned interruption to a service or reduction in the quality of an IT service. And you'll note the ITIL 4 terminology, the definition there of an incident is an unplanned interruption to a service or reduction in the quality of a service. So you will note the word IT is missing, if you like, from the ITIL 4 version of what an incident is versus an ITIL 3 version of what an incident is. And the reason for that is that this allows for enterprise service management. So it's wider than just IT, if you like. There are other service providers. There's shared HR departments in organisations. There's shared finance and accounts services, property teams, facilities teams, legal teams. So that very subtle drop of the word IT in there allows the definition of an incident to be extended much wider and leads into enterprise service management. So think of incident being an unplanned and unexpected interruption to a service, or the quality of that service has been reduced. Okay, next item is shift left. So you may have heard the term shift left approach and wondered what that means. So from a definition perspective, it's about moving activities nearer to your customer, to the customer, to process or technology. So the benefits in doing that are that items can be resolved in a quicker fashion. The whole process, the whole practice can be much more efficient and effective. Ultimately, that results in being able to take savings in things like time, effort, and cost. All good drivers as to why would you want to adopt a shift left approach. In practice, what that means are things like so if I think from an IT operational perspective, a self-service approach or a web submission or some kind of automation. So maybe there's a portal for customers to report problems or incidents or requests of some kind. That could be a self-service portal, or perhaps some kind of knowledge base or self-help type solution, where if people are able to search and find some of the answers to their questions without having to speak to somebody on the service desk, for example, these are good ways of the customer effectively solving their own problems. It empowers users to solve those issues or gain guidance as to how to resolve those issues themselves, and it's about getting better results. So DevOps particularly likes the shift left, as it brings testing before SDLC, and therefore what that means in practice is not having to wait until deployment to then test and then suddenly work out things don't work as expected. So there's definitely time savings, there's definite effort reduction, and there's definite cost savings in there around shift left. But the key point, or the key phrase to remember around shift left is about moving some of those activities closer to the customer. A final example, while I think of it around shift left, might be, so if you have a service desk and your users are contacting that service desk, and if it's to do with a particular application, say for the sake of argument, and when the service desk receive that call, they log it, they categorize it, prioritize it, they assign it over to a technical service team, to another assignment group. Now, it may be, having done some analysis, that some of those tickets that are getting assigned right over to the second or third line teams, it's possible that looking at some of that data, that third line resolver group may look at it and say, actually, do you know what, some of these items that are coming in, we can train up, or we can share that information with the first line team. So perhaps when the next time a user phones up the service desk function, the team on the first line triage may be able to resolve that, rather than it having to go through the through sort of second and third line. Okay, but the key point there is absolutely about moving closer to the customer. So, RACI, what does that stand for? You may well have heard this, and it stands for Responsible, Accountable, Consulted and Informed. And typically these are matrix based, so you may have the various activities on a horizontal or a vertical axis, for example, and then the various roles that that are associated with that service, and then you would go through that matrix, putting R's, A's, C's, and I's on the various squares within that matrix. But fundamentally, a RACI matrix shows who's responsible for actually doing the work, who are the doers, who are actually fixing that or dealing with it on a day-to-day basis, who's ultimately accountable. So perhaps the people who are accountable, they're not actually doing it, but the buck stops with them if things go horribly wrong. Who do we need to keep informed on how we are doing, or what are we doing, and who should we take advice from, who should we consult, who should we get their opinion and just get their take on something. So these are really valuable tools. It's a RACI matrix, and it's no more complicated than using the various roles. So you might have a service delivery manager, you might have an incident manager, you may have a change advisory board manager, change manager, you may have a business relationship manager, you may have a business continuity manager. It's about getting those roles, and perhaps there's some vendors in there as well, and suppliers and partners, but it's working out who are the groups of people and what are the activities, who's responsible for backup, who's responsible for disaster recovery, who's responsible for incident management, who's dealing with first line, second line, third line, so on. And it's a very valuable tool. Can be time consuming, but certainly for the avoidance of doubt who's actually doing what, it avoids the situation of perhaps there's a major P1 and everyone's looking at everyone else thinking, well, who's actually supposed to be doing this bit? I thought you were doing it. And that other person or that other team may say, no, we thought you were doing it. So it's a very valuable tool. Okay, business relationship management, typically abbreviated to BRM, business relationship management, and it's about maintaining relationships with your customers and your stakeholders. So perhaps you have monthly service reviews, perhaps you have quarterly performance reviews, and maybe those are face-to-face, maybe those are over Zoom or Teams or Skype or whatever, but it's having that relationship and understanding what is the business requirement, what is your customer requirement, what's important to them, what value are they looking to achieve, and also understanding the processes, the business process behind what your customer is looking for your service to provide. Identifying customer needs, so not only understanding the as-is situation, but also understanding what new opportunities are there. Perhaps there's some new opportunities in terms of improving a service or a new type of service, or maybe there's a service that doesn't exist at the moment, but you think, okay, well, we could develop that. We could plug that hole for you and make things better. There's a strong emphasis in reporting and service level agreements and KPIs, making sure that all of those are in check and those are communicated and presented back to the particular business unit, to the stakeholder. Ultimately ensures value is being created, that you are co-creating value, that it's being maintained and that it's being delivered. So value proposition, very, very important. And then from a RACI matrix perspective, it's accountability rather than responsibility from typically in a business relationship management. So you may not necessarily be physically doing the work. There will be other teams, there will be other subject matter experts perhaps behind the scenes that are doing work, but the business relationship manager is typically accountable rather than responsible. Not in all cases, but as a broad and sweeping statement. Okay, 4 Ps. So increasingly I'm hearing people talk about the 4 Ps in service management, and this has an ITIL angle to it, but when people talk about 4 Ps, it's usually in order for a service to be effective, you need to think about people, you need to think about the processes, you need to think about the product, and you need to think about the partners. Now, these are version 3 of ITIL terminology language, the 4 Ps, and that's now changed in version 4 of ITIL into dimensions. But if people talk about what are the 4 Ps, it's consider people, consider the processes, consider the product, consider your partners, your third parties. So service value chain. Again, this is an ITIL 4 phrase. It's an operating model for the creation, the delivery, and the ongoing improvement of services. It outlines the key activities required to create value in response to demand and opportunity. So right at the beginning of that service value chain on the left hand side, you'll have that demand and that opportunity input, with the output being value. And the value chain shows how the various components and the various activities all work together, how they're all connecting. So whether it's engaging or planning, designing, transitioning, obtaining and building. Perhaps you need to get hold of a service pack for example, or another piece of software to update something, or maybe you need to build it. And then the delivery and support and improvement aspects, all which then end up with a product or a service being delivered, and then at the end of the chain you would have the value. So an easy way to remember that actually is PIDOD. P for plan, I for improve, E for engage, D for design and transition, O for obtain and build, and D for delivery and support. But at the service value chain, very much ITIL 4 shows how all the components and activities work together, and that allows for the creation and the delivery of IT products and IT services. Okay, dimensions and factors. So again, this is an ITIL 4 terminology, ITIL 4 dimensions and the factors. So the 4 dimensions are organisations and people, value streams and processes, information and technology, partner and suppliers. And the factors, typically those are abbreviated to PESL. So around those 4 dimensions, so if you imagine a square and each cut into 4 sections, and you've got organisation and people, value streams and processes, information and technology, and partners and suppliers, each in a mini square. Around all of those you have these PESL factors, and these are factors that influence the dimensions. So things like political, economical, social, technological, legal and environmental factors. Guiding principles. So in ITIL and IT service management circles, when people talk around guiding principles, the guiding principles in ITIL 4 are around focusing on value, starting where you are, progress iteratively with feedback, collaborate and promote visibility. Note collaborate, not cooperate, collaborate and promote visibility. Think and work holistically. Much easier said than done. Keep it simple, keep it practical, don't make things too complicated. And then optimize and automate. Always look at how things are operating. Is there a simpler way to do it? Are all the steps that are in place? Perhaps you've gone through a service value chain process mapping, practice mapping activity, and there are some steps in there that you think, why are we doing that? Is there an easy way of doing it? Ask those questions. Look for ways to optimize. Look for ways to automate. Perhaps there's lots of repetitive tasks, for example, that could be automated. Right, another service management phrase that comes up quite often is change management. And change management it's a service management practice. It's a service management process in itself, and it enables change to be it enables change to be delivered in a controlled manner and in a way that reduces risk. So ultimately trying to protect that production environment for any unforeseen outages, for example. And the practice, the processes around reviewing changes on a regular basis. Perhaps there's a weekly review of looking at those changes, and particularly production environments. Certainly change management happens in lower environments, in dev and pre-prod, for example, or test environments, but ultimately production environments, protect that production environment. As a practice, there is usually a number of different types of changes. So a normal change, for example, might be a change to a piece of software or a release of some kind, and that would be presented at a weekly change advisory board. So a change manager would be involved in it. It will be presented. It would be recorded in the agenda for a change, and that would be open for discussion, and that would need approval. Standard change is another type of change, and those are typically pre-approved, regular type of changes that happen on a regular basis, and typically they don't go through a change advisory board. They are pre-approved. So I've worked in organisations where the guidance on a change becoming a standard change is that it needs to happen 3 times without any issues whatsoever. It's been released, it's been tested, there's absolutely no problems whatsoever. There's no reoccurring incidents or data impact in any way whatsoever. But standard changes are typically pre-approved, low risk type repetitive changes. An emergency change is, as you might imagine, it's an urgent change, typically because there is a service outage, there's an impact of some kind where a service is unavailable, a service is down, or perhaps there's a security fix of some kind that needs to be applied. And an emergency change is certainly something that needs to be kept in check. It's not an excuse to use an emergency change because you forgot to present something at CAB, and now it's just really important and you need to do it really, really quickly, which I've certainly seen that approach in many organisations. Emergency changes are just that. There's an issue now, and people need to be able to deal with that and resolve that now, and it's not because I forgot to present something or it's just really important, it just needs doing, and I want it done really, really quickly. So those are the 3 types of changes in change management circles: normal, standard, emergency. And you would have a governance board. So the change advisory board would be a governing board that would have a chair and would have members and would have people that are able to approve changes within that board, and they would be presented typically by the person that's raised a change request. They could be presented to this governance board and discussed and ultimately either approved or not approved, or perhaps further information is needed, approved subject to getting further information. FSC, quite often the abbreviation is Forward Schedule of Change. So in mature organisations, you'll come across an FSC where these are the changes that are going to be happening throughout the year, for example. So you may know there are changes coming up in Q4, for example, and perhaps it's Q2 at the moment. So you're kind of looking at what's in the pipeline, what's coming up further down the line. Fundamentally, think about change management as protecting the production environment for a business. Okay, IT lifecycle. This is ITIL 3 terminology, but the various life cycles within ITIL certainly is strategy, the design, transition, operation, and continuous service improvement. In ITIL 4, this is now changed to the service value system. So just to be mindful of that, really, the various stages in the life cycle are around strategy, design, transition, operation, continuous service improvement. So in strategy, for example, you would have things like demand management or financial management, portfolio management, business relationship management, generation of strategy generation. In the design phase of the life cycle, you would have items such as supplier management, service level management, service catalogue management, availability, capacity, continuity, security, all activities that are in that design stage. And then transition, you would have items such as evaluation, test and validation, knowledge management, sometimes KT, you see that seen as assets, configuration management, transition, support, planning, release and deployment, and change management. And then for service ops, you'd expect items around problem management, request fulfillment, incident, event, access type activities, access control. There's also functions that you would expect to see in service operations. So, for example, a really obvious function would be the service desk or application management. There's other functions such as technical management and IT operations in there as well. And then the continuous service improvement is all about measuring and reporting the service. So service management, service measurement, service reporting activities, and service improvement, and keeping tracks of those items. But to reiterate, these are version 3 of ITIL terminologies. In ITIL 4, this now moves into a service value system, which is commonly referred to as SVS. Okay, ITIL processes. So quite often you will hear a lot of the processes such as incident management process or problem management process. But what are these processes? So in ITIL 3 there's 26 processes, and I went through them on the slide a few moments ago, in fact. But these processes around incident management, problem management, change management, access control, supplier management, and each of those are divided into parts of a life cycle. So there's a strategy, there's a design, there's a transition, there's a service ops, there's a CSI life cycle, and within each one of those sections, in each one of those sort of life cycle segments, there are a whole bunch of processes. There are 26 of those processes. In ITIL 4, the terminology changes from processes into the word practices, and there's also 34 practices in ITIL 4, and those are then subdivided into things like general management practices, service management practices, and technical management practices. But if you hear ITIL 3 process mentioned, it's about those 26 processes within that life cycle. Okay, service desk function. So typically a service desk function is a single point of contact for people to contact. Maybe there are multiple sources. You can phone up the service desk, you can email the service desk, you can some cases use a chat function to contact a service desk, or maybe there's a self-service portal on the company intranet or an internet provider of some kind. But the idea is that the service desk function, so an operational function, is a single point of contact, typically involved in practices and processes around incident management, service request fulfillment management, and access management. And ServiceNow is an example of a tool that you might use to run a service desk function. SLAs. So this term is used a lot in IT service management circles. So an SLA stands for Service Level Agreement, and it's an agreement. I mean, it's pretty much as the word as the definition sounds. It's an agreement on the level of service that is expected. So think of it as a commitment between a service provider and an end user. There are different types of SLAs. So you can have a customer SLA, an internal SLA, and you can have a vendor SLA. And those SLAs will have lots of different items in there that will deal with what the response level will be, what percentage of items. So perhaps there might be something in that says 90% of P1s will be resolved in 3 hours, or 90% of P2s will be resolved in 6 hours, or there may be sort of a mixture of SLAs and KPIs in there talking about first time fix, for example, or time to answer, or call abandonment rate, or mean time to acknowledgement. But the SLA will talk about what that level of service is expected, and that can range across lots of different types of practices. So it could be incident management, it could be problem management, it could be, for example, that your expectation is that RCA documents, root cause analysis documents, for a P1 need to be delivered within 3 working days 98% of the time, or an RCA for a P2 might need to be delivered 97% of the time within 10 days, or whatever it may be. But it's that commitment from a service provider to a customer, to an end user. KPI, so I touched on that on the slide a few moments ago, but KPI stands for Key Performance Indicator, and it's a metric which helps you manage an ITSM, IT service management process, or a practice, or perhaps a service overall, or perhaps even a specific activity. But KPIs tend to be a critical measure, and it's definitely something that you have to keep an eye on. They take the temperature of operational efficiency and effectiveness. Your KPIs will show at a very high level how things are running. Are they running effectively? Are they running efficiently? Typically cost-led, and they are all about the value that's being delivered. Is it delivering value? Is it enabling the expected value? OLAs. So these stand for operational level agreements. They're like, think of them as an SLA, except typically they're for internal agreements. So perhaps an IT service provider to another part of the same organisation. So it's an agreement between different departments within the same organisation. And an OLA, you would expect an OLA to define things like the delivery of services to a customer. It's about defining the what, i.e. the items, the goods. Perhaps it's an IT service that needs to be delivered and provided. And certainly a RACI matrix in an OLA makes things nice and clear, and it avoids I quite like the expression, it's for the avoidance of doubt. But who is actually doing what and when? So there's no misunderstandings in terms of I thought you were doing this. No, I thought you were doing that. So a very simple example might be the service desk and the support group, so the assignment groups or the resolver groups within that same organisation. Okay, so PBA, so patterns of business activity. So this is a phrase that I've come across quite a lot over the last few years, and it stems from demand management. It's a demand management practice and process. Businesses have peaks and troughs in their operating model. So, for example, in the insurance industry, there are times of the year when it becomes more busy than perhaps other periods. So the renewal period would be a good example. Or in other sort of financial services, or in a lot of companies, sort of year end or month end are high business activity periods of time. So clearly the accounts department are under a lot of pressure, and perhaps they're working longer hours and they're using the IT systems more, and they're doing more processing, more reporting, they're running more activities at the financial year end than they are during the middle of a regular month and another month perhaps. So those have impacts on IT and things like demand management and capacity management. That's where these things kind of come into play. So the IT systems, perhaps there's more compute power needed in February than there is in December. As an example, or whenever the renewal period is in an insurance organisation, perhaps there's more processing or there's more storage need or more network capacity to send information back into. And part of patterns of business activities is important to map that to IT capabilities. So if processing power, it needs to double in February for the sake of argument, because that's the year end for the sake of argument, does the IT infrastructure, is it able to cope with that? Is it able to flex with that increased business capacity? And the reverse is also true as well. There may well be times in the year where the current infrastructure and compute power or processing power or network capacity is way more than that's needed, and perhaps is there an opportunity for some savings there? Is there a way of flexing that capacity? If a network link is running at 5% utilisation for most of the year, and then for 1 month in the year it's running at 80%. Is there some way of looking at that to make that more cost effective? Okay, ISO, i.e. IEC 27002, what is it? So this is a code of practice for organisations' security standards, controls and practices. It's a global standard of good practice for information security, and it dates back around 30 plus years, and it's the precursor of BS 7799. CMDB. What's CMDB? So this stands for Configuration Management Database, which manages configuration records. So during the life cycle of a CI, it tracks its journey from its beginning to its end, from the point of it being deployed to the point of it being retired. And it also maps relationships, so it's really useful in terms of looking at, well, if this piece of equipment is impacted or goes down, what does that do to some of the upstream activities or upstream assets, or some of those lower downstream assets? What happens if this configuration item fails? So it's really useful in business continuity and disaster recovery planning and scenario planning, what ifs. It also contains lots of information typically around so a particular configuration item it would contain information such as incidents relating to it, problems, perhaps there's some change records, perhaps it's been upgraded or has had an upgrade of some kind. There's in larger organisations, it's not unusual to have a role of a configuration manager, somebody who's responsible for all of those CIs. And it's widely used, if not pretty much for all service management processes. So it's a database that spreads across pretty much all processes, pretty much all practices. Okay, so the term self-service portal. So this is fairly self-explanatory. So a service desk portal to log incidents or service requests that need to be fulfilled, or perhaps people just have questions about something. It's a portal that that would perhaps be on your intranet or internet facing site, and tooling would be used to collate that information and then pass those on to different assigned groups. So ServiceNow, is an example. And again, I've just put in there around shift left. So this whole idea of a self-service portal, it definitely lends itself to the shift left approach, moving those activities closer towards the customer. Release management. So release management is a service management process, service management practice, and some organisations, larger organisations, may have a dedicated release manager role, ensuring that releases are managed and tested and deployed in a controlled manner. So making sure that there's proper oversight of releasing services. So services could be anything from software to hardware to brand new IT services or new products. There would be an involvement in change advisory boards in terms of any kind of releases. So you would expect a release of the latest version of a piece of software, for example, to be presented at a weekly CAB, and particularly looking at that production environment. So release management would be the ultimate endpoint, is around releasing it to the production environment. But of course, it would be expected to be tested within those lower environments. First of all, those pre-production environments, those QA environments, those UAT environments. So it's defined as a collection, in that there's lots of information. So the release plan, documentation, all of the information around that release. Perhaps there'll be release notes. Okay, service request management. So sometimes you can call it request for service, and it's a service management operational activity. Service desks are typically involved in service request management, and those service requests would come in from phone, from email, from self-service, perhaps even a chat portal of some kind. And a service request is something that needs to be provided. Now that can be a physical item, like, hey, I need a new phone, or a new laptop, or I need access to something, or it could be a password that needs to be requested, or maybe you've got a password but there's an issue with it and you've forgotten it and you need to reset it. So those are examples of service requests. Really important to monitor these and report on service requests in the same way you would incidents as well. But service request management, you need to be looking at costs, looking at asset locations, what are the volumes, are there any trends in there? And absolutely linking that into the asset management practice as well. So if people are asking for a new phone or a new laptop, great, obviously needs to go through the procurement process and the authorization process to make sure it's valid. But once you've then okayed that, where is it, who's it going to, has it been asset tagged. Event management. So event management as a practice, it's an operational activity that you are managing, collating, creating alerts on your estate. So in some organisations, you may well find there's a dedicated role as somebody who deals with event management. Ultimately, what you're trying to do is to kind of look at what's happening. Are there any problems we need to be aware of? That you would have a piece of software that would perhaps trigger alerts when a threshold's been met. So, for example, maybe some kind of processing capacity or some kind of storage capacity. Once it's got over 50%, then send me a note and or send an alert to say, hey, look, I'm at 50% capacity. Not a problem, but I'm on the wrong side of 50%. Or perhaps something, if it's unable to, if you're unable to operate a service, you can't connect to a server, for example. Perhaps the event management tool would send an alert of some kind to say this service is down. And ideally, this should be linked into your service management tool to perhaps create a ticket with a high priority to say, look, there's a service outage going on here. We've automatically created a ticket for this, and make sure the right subject matter experts are dealing with that. So look for automation activities and automation opportunities in there. One of the big issues around event management is the sheer volume of data. It can become unmanageable very, very quickly, and it's important to be able to work out where are the important items that need to be looked at versus the other items that are just for information. Okay, problem management. So problem management is a practice and a process in service management, and it's a cause of one or more incidents. So something's happened, and there may well be multiple incidents relating to a particular problem. And the cause is usually known at the time when the problem record is created. The outputs from problem management would be things like a root cause analysis document. It's important to be as proactive as you can with problem management. Typically, problem management is reactive. There's been a major issue, there's been lots of incidents, we've created a problem management record, and we're now going to look at it. How can we avoid this from happening again? But there's also a proactive element to problem management, and that's quite often overlooked, mainly because most of the effort, most of the energy is about just keeping the lights on, making sure things are working and ticking over. But I'd certainly urge, if you get the opportunity, to be able to look at proactive problem management. What could happen? How can we divert it before it actually does happen? And being aware that there's always been a conflict between incident management and problem management. Really good example is you may well have a P1 incident, service is down, for example. The problem management side of service management are going to want to go, oh, this is great, let's try and find out, let's get as much information as we can together. And the incident management is almost in direct conflict with that, in terms of, no, we just need to get the service back again. We need to reboot the server. The problem management team may well then say, yeah, but we're going to lose lots of valuable information because as the device is being rebooted, maybe some of that information is going to be lost. But there's always that conflict between incident management and problem management. Okay, so that's the end of my session. Please do subscribe, and I'll be posting some more recordings shortly, so please do subscribe, and I'll ensure that I keep doing these videos and keeping you up to date. Okay, thank you very much.